Imagine pouring like $10 billion into a laboratory, knowing there's a 90% chance the only thing you'll produce after a decade of work is a very, very expensive way to make test tubes smell funny.
Right, yeah. It sounds absurd.
But I mean, that is the daily reality of corporate research and development. It completely defies the basic rules of how we usually think about capitalism.
It really does because, we expect the market to rationally allocate resources, but when it comes to the pure creation of knowledge, those classical economic rules basically just vaporize.
Exactly. So, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're pulling from a stack of historical economic research, and we're really anchoring this on Kenneth Arrow's legendary 1962 paper on the economics of invention.
A classic.
Yeah, total classic. And our mission today is to explore this fundamental, almost invisible flaw in the free market, which is that it systematically fails to reach an optimal level of investment in research and development. You just don't get enough of it.
Right, and we're looking at a pretty profound tension here. There is this deeply rooted clash between the social benefit of free, universally accessible information and then, the private corporate need for profit.
Because they have to make money.
Exactly. And Arrow mathematically proves that these two forces are inherently at odds. They just don't mix well.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the core shift in perspective Arrow demands is realizing that invention is not manufacturing.
Right.
Like if you manufacture a chair, you have a physical object subject to normal supply and demand.
Right, it's tangible.
But invention is the production of information. And information just violently rejects classical economics for three specific reasons, which we're going to get into.
Yeah, and the first massive barrier is just the sheer unmanageable uncertainty of it all.
The risk.
Exactly, the risk. You cannot guarantee output based on inputs. I mean, you can hire 1,000 genius scientists, give them unlimited resources, and they might cure a disease.
Or it might just hit dead ends for a decade.
Right. And the economic system struggles immensely with that level of unpredictable variance. Arrow points out that, in an ideal, purely theoretical economy, we'd have something called a commodity option market to perfectly allocate that specific risk.
Right, like the agricultural futures market.
Yes, exactly.
Because a farmer doesn't know if a severe drought is coming, so they buy contracts that pay out differently depending on the state of nature. Like good rain, bad rain, you hedge the bet so the farmer doesn't just go bankrupt because the weather didn't cooperate.
That is the exact mechanism.
Yeah.
But for the production of knowledge, that market simply doesn't exist.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't go to Wall Street and buy an option that says, I'll take 50 shares of what if our scientists fail to invent a new solid-state battery by next Tuesday?
Right. It just doesn't work like that. But, if you're listening to this, you might be wondering why a company can't just buy, invention insurance. Because if the fear of a failed research project is what's holding back innovation, couldn't a massive financial institution or the government theoretically just insure the research costs? It seemed like a pretty easy fix.
It does seem easy, but Arrow digs into the insurance industry to explain why that completely fails. And he focuses on a concept called the moral factor.
The moral factor.
Yeah. Let's look at a simpler example, like fire insurance. From a purely mathematical standpoint, an insurance company could theoretically insure a commercial warehouse for twice its actual value, right? And collect a much higher premium.
But they refuse to do that.
Exactly. Why?
Well, because if I'm doubly insured for my warehouse, I'm suddenly not going to spend money on state-of-the-art sprinkler systems.
Nope.
In fact, if the business is having a terrible financial quarter, I might start, looking at a book of matches and a can of gasoline.
Exactly. The policy fundamentally changes the behavior of the insured.
Yeah.
Shifting the risk basically dulls the incentive to be careful, or in the case of invention, the incentive to actually succeed.
It's like telling a university student they are guaranteed an A in the class regardless of their final exam score.
Right.
I mean, why would they spend all night studying? If a corporation knows their R&D costs are fully covered, even if the scientists, have ping pong all day and invent absolutely nothing, the drive to actually achieve that breakthrough just vanishes.
Yeah, the core problem is that the insurer cannot easily distinguish between the state of nature, meaning the science was genuinely just too difficult to crack, and the decision of the insured.
Meaning the scientists simply didn't work hard enough.
Exactly. And because of this moral factor, you can never fully ensure invention without destroying the efficiency of the invention process itself.
It's a huge trap, and we actually have a really stark real-world illustration of this in the sources from C.J. Hitch, looking at the United States Air Force.
Oh yeah, this is a fascinating comparison. Hitch contrasts the pre-World War II era with the modern era. Back then, the Air Corps would just announce that they needed a new plane. And aircraft companies would use their own private capital to design and build actual flying prototypes. They'd fly them out to a test site for a literal competition.
Which is insane when you think about it. The risk was staggering because the losers just lost their entire investment.
Yes, but the incentive to build a hyper-efficient working machine was absolute.
Right. If it didn't fly, you ate the loss. The private company bore all of the risk.
Contrast that with today. I mean, developing a modern jet fighter or a missile system costs billions of dollars.
Yeah, no single company can bear that kind of catastrophic risk alone anymore.
Exactly. So the government steps in at the very beginning, right at the design stage, with cost-plus contracts.
Which means the government covers the cost of development, plus guarantees a profit margin on top of that. So they are effectively acting as the invention insurance company.
And boom, the moral factor immediately kicks in. Since the defense contractors aren't risking their own capital, the entire incentive structure just twists.
Because they're structurally incentivized to make wildly optimistic, totally unrealistic promises about performance and timelines, right? Just to win that initial risk-free contract.
Precisely. And once they win it, they're essentially locked in as a sole source.
And the competitive drive just evaporates,
Yeah.
which leads to the massive budget overruns and the decades-long delays we see constantly in defense spending today.
Yeah. So if extreme uncertainty stops companies from risking their own money, but ensuring them destroys their motivation to work efficiently,
Then the free market is essentially paralyzed.
it really is.
Yeah.
Which brings us to the second massive hurdle.
Okay.
Let's say a firm somehow survives that financial risk.
Yeah.
They spend the money, they don't have insurance, but they actually manage to discover something groundbreaking.
A miracle happens.
Right. They immediately hit a completely different wall,
Yeah.
trying to assert ownership over what they just found. And the economic term for this is inappropriability.
Okay, but I can already hear the objections to this. I mean, we have the patent office for exactly this reason. You invent a new type of blender, you patent it, and nobody else can legally sell your blender.
Sure, but Arrow points out a massive blind spot in that logic.
Yeah.
We are conditioned to think of information as a final consumer product,
Yeah.
like the blender.
Right.
But in the realm of scientific research, information isn't just an output. It is the primary input for future research.
Oh, wow. So the actual value of a discovery isn't necessarily the commercial product it makes, but the subsequent ideas it sparks in someone else's head.
Exactly. Let's look at an example from Arrow's paper. Suppose your company spends millions and discovers a specific metal compound that is highly resistant to heat,
Okay.
and you patent that specific use. Well, the moment you publish your findings, a researcher at a rival firm looks at your data and thinks, if this metal resists heat, maybe I should test these 3 chemically related metals.
So they are taking the fundamental discovery, the baseline information you paid millions to generate, and just using it as free raw material for their own breakthrough.
Exactly. Now, imagine if property rights were strict enough to perfectly protect your initial investment. That second inventor should legally have to pay you for the baseline knowledge that sparked their idea.
And anyone who benefits from their subsequent discovery should have to pay you a fraction, too.
Right.
It would be an absolute nightmare. I mean, you'd need armies of lawyers just to read scientific journals, trying to trace the exact lineage of an idea back to its original source.
It would be impossible. The entire scientific method relies on building upon previous knowledge.
Yeah.
If you forced inventors to pay tolls for every prior thought that influenced them, you'd freeze the scientific process entirely.
Which is why actual patent laws sharply restrict what you can claim. They just have to keep the system functioning.
Right. But the consequence of that is that the original inventor ends up giving away a massive amount of economic value for free.
They're generating the foundational knowledge that the rest of the world uses to build billion-dollar industries, but they can only capture a tiny sliver of that value for themselves.
Exactly. And if we step back and look at the macro level, this perfectly explains why the free market heavily under-rewards basic foundational research.
Like theoretical physics or mapping a genome?
Right. Basic science is almost entirely an input for applied science later down the line.
Because if I'm a corporate CEO, I'm looking at a 10-year study on molecular physics and thinking, why on earth should I fund this? My competitor is just going to read the published paper in a decade and use it to build a better smartphone battery a year later. I'll just let them pay for the physics research.
Yep.
But if every company makes that entirely rational economic choice, the foundational physics research never happens.
Never happens. So we've established the market won't bear the risk, and it can't grant true ownership.
Hmm.
But let's pretend a company successfully navigates the risk, makes a discovery, and actually secures a decent patent.
Okay, they beat the odds twice.
All right, now they just need to sell the information. And they immediately face the third economic paradox, the indivisibility of information.
The indivisibility, meaning the transmission cost of information is basically zero. Once you have a mathematical formula or a blueprint or a line of software code, it costs nothing to duplicate it infinitely.
Exactly. Which highlights the ultimate tension in Arrow's work. From a broad societal welfare standpoint, optimal allocation means that information should be distributed for free.
Right. If a cancer treatment protocol costs zero to reproduce, society obviously benefits the most when every single hospital gets it immediately.
Yes.
Yeah.
But doing that destroys the inventor's ability to profit. And no profit means no incentive to invent the next treatment.
Yeah.
And the problem compounds when you try to commercialize it, because information is indivisible. You cannot sell a piece of a formula to prove that the whole thing works. You have to reveal the entire formula.
Here's where it gets really interesting. This creates a massive catch-22 for buyers and sellers. It's like trying to sell someone a joke.
Ooh, that's a good way to put it.
Right. I can't tell you the punchline to prove the joke is funny before you buy it. Because once you hear the punchline, you don't need to pay me. You already have the joke.
Exactly. Your market value just dropped to zero in an instant. A buyer cannot possibly know the true economic value of a piece of information until they possess it and actually evaluate it.
And once they possess it to evaluate it, they've acquired it for free. You can't put it back in the box.
You really can't.
Yeah.
And because of this indivisibility, buyers are forced to just guess. They look at past experience. They make estimates based on the reputation of the seller.
Which is basically just gambling.
Totally. They are gambling on an unknown quantity. And because of that, buyers will almost always undervalue and underpurchase information compared to its actual utility.
So the market demand for information will always be structurally lower than its true value to society.
Yes.
I mean, think about that. The inventor assumes all the risk, captures only a fraction of the value due to weak patents, and then struggles to sell it for what it's actually worth because buyers can't verify it.
That is the trifecta of market failure for invention.
Man. So if you're listening to this, you are probably piecing together an alternative solution in your head. You might be thinking, wait, normal competitive markets with lots of small firms obviously struggle with the massive risk and cost of R&D, but what about giant tech monopolies?
Right, the big guys.
Yeah, they have unlimited capital. They don't worry about competitors stealing their basic research because they literally own the market and they can afford massive losses. You'd naturally assume a monopoly is the ultimate protected engine for invention.
It is a completely natural assumption to make. I mean, we look at massive conglomerates pouring billions into artificial intelligence or quantum computing, and it just seems to make sense.
Yeah.
But what's fascinating here is that Arrow delivers a mathematical bombshell in this paper that proves the exact opposite. Monopolies actually have structurally less incentive to innovate than competitive firms.
Less incentive. Let me guess why. Is it because if they invent a cheaper, better way to do things, they're really just cannibalizing the massive profits they were already making with the old technology?
That is the exact mechanism. It's called the replacement effect.
The replacement effect. Okay.
Yeah. Imagine a fiercely competitive firm that is currently making zero economic profit. Like, they are just barely staying in business.
It's growing every month.
Exactly. If they introduce a massive cost-saving invention, they leapfrog the entire industry. They capture an entirely new wave of profit. They're basically going from zero to hero. The incentive is monumental.
Because they have everything to gain and absolutely nothing to lose.
Right. Now flip the scenario. You are a monopoly, you already own the entire market, and you're extracting massive monopoly profits.
Life is good.
Life is very good. So if your R&D lab invents that exact same cost-saving measure, you don't capture a new market. You already have it.
Ah, you are only gaining the margin between your new, slightly lower costs and your old costs. Your reward is just a slightly better profit margin, not an entirely new empire.
Exactly. Their pre-invention market power acts as a massive anchor. The financial reward for a monopoly to invent is fundamentally smaller than the reward would be for a competitive disruptor, simply because the monopoly is just replacing its own dominance.
The status quo is just too incredibly profitable to risk drastically changing it. The monopoly's internal calculus is, Why spend $10 billion on a radical new technology when I'm already making $20 billion milking the old technology?
Right.
Best case scenario, I bump my margins up 2%. Worst case, I accidentally disrupt my own cash cow.
Yep. The only theoretical advantage a monopoly has is that they can better protect their secrets, which mitigates that inappropriability problem we talked about earlier.
Right?
But Arrow's math demonstrates that whatever slight advantage they gain in hoarding secrets is completely eclipsed by the massive disincentive of their existing profits.
Wow. So, what does this all mean for you, for us? We've essentially diagnosed a systemic illness in how we produce knowledge. Because information is inherently risky to produce, nearly impossible to exclusively own without breaking science, and paradoxically difficult to value before buying, free competitive markets will just chronically underfund it.
Yeah. And the massive monopolies, the giants we assume could shoulder that burden, actually have a built-in mathematical disincentive to change the world. They prefer the profitable present to the unpredictable future.
It fundamentally challenges the idea that if we just leave the market alone, it will automatically build the future we need, which really leaves us with a pretty massive conundrum regarding how we actually survive the next century.
It does. And there is a specific concept from the sources that highlights just how difficult this is to solve. Arrow notes that the smartest way to navigate the extreme unavoidable uncertainty of RD is through something called parallel research.
Parallel research, meaning you don't pick a single winner at the start.
Exactly. You fund a wide variety of competing studies and completely different approaches right at the beginning, when you basically know the least.
You just let them all run, and as the information becomes clearer, you gradually eliminate the dead ends. You essentially buy knowledge by running parallel experiments.
Yes. But here is the profound friction we are left with. The free market won't fund parallel basic research because private firms can't capture the downstream profit.
Right.
Monopolies won't fund it because they don't want to disrupt themselves. And if we rely on the government using cost-plus contracts, the moral factor guarantees immense inefficiency because all the risk is shifted.
So how do we efficiently organize the massive, multifaceted research required to solve incredibly complex, unpredictable crises like climate change or global pandemics? That is a question that requires a completely new way of thinking about human cooperation. If the traditional machinery of capitalism inherently sputters when it comes to the pure creation of ideas, who or what should be carrying the torch of innovation? We'll leave you to ponder that puzzle. Thank you for joining us on this custom deep dive. Until next time, keep questioning the mechanics of the world around you.